Hello, you wonderful soul. Whether we want it or not, we are all currently being confronted with intense ascension symptoms. And as I perceive it, it is precisely because a strong wave of ascension is currently confronting us with our deep-seated fears and consequently our unresolved past. And what exactly is happening to us and how we can specifically deal with it, I will address here. Exciting topic. My name is Riedel. I've followed the shamanic path for almost 20 years and am initiated in the tradition of the Incas and the tradition of the Blackfoot. Firstly, I would like to address the ascension energies. And at first glance, it all sounds quite benevolent and beneficial, yes, ascension energies. But when we are confronted more deeply with our issues, it can happen that we find ourselves trapped in a spiral of fear, powerlessness, helplessness, or even overwhelm. And what exactly do ascension energies do? Fundamentally, they aim to liberate us and lead us to our true potential or true greatness. And everything that stands in our way is sometimes ruthlessly brought to our attention because only through pain or a feeling that life simply cannot continue, we are then forced to take a different perspective or change our entire life or behavior. Without this pain, we remain stuck in the old life or the old consciousness. So we are all currently required to constantly adapt. And because of this, you might also be experiencing constant fatigue or difficulty concentrating, maybe even headaches, restless dreams, or trouble sleeping. Or mental processes can become active. How? Emotions from panic, existential fears, sadness, despair, overwhelm, or even powerlessness. And if you are feeling the same way right now, feel free to comment below. Because I have the feeling that just as you are experiencing it, many others are too. We feel that we are not going through this alone, but that we are all being confronted with it within the framework of ascension energies. So what happens now when we are confronted with our deep-seated fears? To get specific, Carl just came to me. And Carl is a successful entrepreneur who also carries a lot of responsibility for his employees and his family. And he told me that he hardly has any time for himself anymore and is overwhelmed by massive existential fears. And he also told me that he feels driven to constantly generate new income so that he can provide for everyone. And now has a feeling of being completely empty and would prefer to run away. And as we then delve deeper into these fears together, exactly what scared him the most came to the surface. Losing everything, not fulfilling one's role, or being seen as a failure and penniless on the street. These are the classic existential fears and the inner images that become active in the process. And the reason I'm telling you this story is that I've noticed that many people are currently experiencing the same thing as Carl. And feel free to comment if you personally feel the same way or are going through similar experiences, because I have the sense that many people are going through these intense processes. When I had his situation described to me in more detail, it became clear that he was projecting his fears and concerns onto the future. At the same time, he felt trapped in his role, with everyone dependent on him draining his energy. This left him feeling completely helpless in the situation and utterly empty. And it also happened that he always wanted to be seen as a good person in the eyes of others, even if it meant neglecting himself. And then I asked him, what if he didn't actually have to be a good person, and it didn't matter at all what others thought of him? If he now allows himself to feel more deeply into this exercise, to see what it does to him. And that's exactly what you can do, if you want, right now, by watching the video and taking a brief moment to pause and see how it affects you when you engage with it. As he delved deeper and deeper into it, he told me that he felt a sense of relief, of being free, of not having to be anyone. And this exact feeling arises exactly when we are ready to let go of our old roles and the old expectations associated with them. Yes, in this connection, we are virtually at the mercy of our own expectations of ourselves and the expectations of others, almost like a blind spot. That such pressure can then arise within you to meet the expectations you carry within yourself and the expectations from the outside. Yes, and that can indeed be a very crucial mechanism for why we increasingly feel trapped in a role that has been devised for us by others. And that's exactly what it's about here, recognizing that and diving deeper into whatever role you want to take on in life. Not just take it. Yes. And when we then delved deeper into his fear, I asked him what would he need to do to resolve this situation, or what specifically in the now is causing him fear. And now it turned out that he was constantly feeding himself through the fear matrix of the media, focusing on what could happen, how terrible everything is, and engaging with topics like inflation, war, and other issues. Yes, and indeed, as a result, this constant threat was active in his system. And therefore, here's a reminder for you, if you might be experiencing something similar, that you are increasingly isolating yourself more and more from this fear matrix, so you don't actually absorb too much heavy energy from these fear-inducing news. I understand that it is there, but you shouldn't constantly focus on it, because then you are essentially feeding all your fears as well. Specifically, he then told me that he needed to create a clear overview of his expenses and his income for this situation, and afterwards, if necessary, draw the appropriate conclusions. And that's exactly what scares him, and that's why he hasn't dealt with it yet. And if he were to do just that, he would have the necessary clarity about how the situation really is. And it is precisely this fear, which is currently active, that paralyzes him from doing exactly that. Yes, and it is precisely this mechanism that keeps us in a continuous loop, in this helplessness and victim mode. What can we do now to change this, take responsibility, and also do the unpleasant things that will give us the necessary clarity afterward? That means fear is indeed an advisor, a truly very good advisor. But if we avoid the fear, try to push it away, or run from it, then it is essentially the exact opposite for us. It's like a ghost that always chases us, even bringing sleepless nights in our dreams, or perhaps creating fear and nightmares because we are not used to truly confronting it. And then it can become even more active in our dreams. And if we now learn that fear is an advisory, cautionary entity that can also help us change a situation, if we just learn to deal with this fear differently, we essentially need a new relationship with our fear, as we now need to break away from our old matrix, where we learn to avoid fears, run away from them, freeze, or fall into victim mode. We need to activate a more natural relationship with our fears. This means, quite specifically, having the courage to dive into this feeling of fear, exactly with the questions you have just heard, in order to perhaps also gain clarity about what exactly is underlying exactly the fear that lies beneath. It's not panic, it's exactly this image that we have in our heads, for example. Sitting penniless on the street, or no longer being loved and recognized, being cast out by society. These are often the primal fears that are deeply rooted within us. And that's exactly our mechanism that prevents us from going even deeper, because we don't want to feel it more intensely. But if you are able to first perceive it, not letting it consume you, but simply observing it from the outside, essentially taking on a sort of observer role, then the fear is trying to show you something. Show how you can also change the situation. And now comes the important part. When you learn to step into this so-called responsibility instance, to step into your power, not to fall into victim mode, and then to make a plan step by step so that you know exactly how to get out of it. I explained to him that from a shamanic perspective, he was suffering from a disease called fear. And of course, it also takes time to gradually get it out of your system so that you can integrate new, strengthening habits into your life, allowing you to remain more stable within yourself. And so far, we have learned that fear is something bad and should definitely be suppressed or avoided at all costs. And thus, we have not learned to perceive fear as an advisory and cautionary instance, as I have just explained earlier. And now we can gradually learn to deal with this fear in a more constructive way. And I know that at first it is naturally uncomfortable because we have to take a leap of faith and not let ourselves be consumed by this old pattern of rigidity and helplessness. And now comes the important part, because the rigidity, the helplessness, the victim mode, and so on are linked to our experiences we had as children. Because as children, we often experienced situations that were hopeless, where we were practically at the mercy of authority figures. And this feeling of paralysis, helplessness, powerlessness, or the feeling of not being good enough emerged. And from this, a fear of no longer being loved and recognized also arose. And that is essentially our root. So ultimately, it all comes down to constructively dealing with our childhood in a positive and constructive manner from our early years. Because once you have learned this, the feeling of reacting with rigidity, helplessness, or a victim mentality will also dissolve within you when fear or a challenge arises. And that is the key. We cannot get rid of fears, for example, just by thinking positively and creating beautiful thoughts in our minds. But we can only resolve the fears if we are willing to dive into the mystical level of emotions. So we need to have the courage to delve deeper right there. And when we learn to resolve it, everything truly indeed changes permanently on the outside. And the situations change. And above all, you can step more into your power, into your strength, because you are no longer wrapped in a heavy cloak of helplessness, rigidity, powerlessness, or perhaps even panic, depending on what it is. Because perhaps you actually experienced in your childhood that your life was threatened. Thus, the Ascension energies want to help us confront these very issues. That we come into our power, that we come into our greatness, that we are also able to consciously manifest our future unless it is attached and distorted by too many fears and heavy energy. Therefore, the first major step is to take care of your heavy energy and start letting it go. And I would like to describe it in such a way that the most powerful opponent we can face is our misguided ego or our self-awareness. This means that we have blind spots in our system about how we are supposed to be. Or we constantly criticize ourselves and belittle ourselves, feeling worse and worse without really knowing why. It's clear because we don't realize that we are treating ourselves this way. And to that, I want to give you an image. I once watched a documentary on how natives from Africa catch a monkey. They place a banana or a nut inside a tree trunk just big enough for a hand to fit in. And they also make sure that a monkey clearly sees them putting something in there. And then they just wait patiently. Because the monkey can't stand the curiosity and wants to have exactly that thing from the tree trunk. And now he reaches into the tree trunk, but then he can't take his hand out of the trunk because the opening is too narrow when he makes a fist. And then they calmly walk over to the monkey, who is trying to run away in a panic, but he can't because his hand is stuck. And then they very gently lift him up slowly until he automatically lets go. And it's the same with us. We hold on to our fears and limitations just like the monkey, until the universe forces us, pulls us away, and then we are ready to let go. Because only then do we realize that we have been holding on to something. And those are the blind spots in our system. The next point is what I observed, that when people also recognize their blind spots, such as that they have projected too many fears onto the future, or have not done what was necessary to change a situation, whether it was quitting a job or ending a relationship earlier. And as a result, they feel bad and judge themselves. Why didn't I do this earlier? These are the standard phrases. And when that happens, this is my advice to you. It is the first major step of realization, which might throw you into a crisis because you then become aware of it. Yes, and then I want to encourage you that everything is fine just the way it is. You couldn't have changed your situation earlier because you were in a different state of consciousness than the one you possess now. And even if it can be sobering and very confrontational for you, it brings you the necessary clarity to change the situation at all. And to that, I would like to say the following. Today, you are more advanced in your consciousness than ever before in your life. I will repeat it again. You are more advanced in your consciousness today than ever before in your life. By that, I don't just mean that you think differently about yourself or your situation, but also that you are in an elevated state of consciousness, which then enables you to step more into your strength, take on more responsibility, activate your inner power, and do whatever is necessary to realign yourself, whatever that means for you. So don't judge your past with your current consciousness. Why didn't I do it earlier? Because you simply didn't know any better. You always do the best you can at any given moment. Many thanks to my English community, as I did not expect such a large turnout for the Shamanic Self-Healing course. In this course, I share the essence of my knowledge from over 20 years of my shamanic work. In addition to numerous videos, you also have access to one of the most effective meditations I have encountered on my journey to create the greatest impact. And here you will learn, step by step, how to dissolve your fears and blockages, reconnect with yourself, and realign your life. And the great thing is, you can do it all at your own pace because the course is yours for life. You can get this course at a discounted introductory price for the next 3 weeks, and I'll put the link up here for you. I hope it helps you change your life as well.